Let's see here. I was watching a YouTube video. I guess we could take a look at that. So this guy keeps going on and on and on about fiction stories of immortality. But he kind of isn't really actively arguing against them. He's just kind of talking about them. I'm wondering if that's going to change at all. Kind of seems like maybe not, because does it say anything about there being another chapter? Right now we're in the last chapter. Well, I don't know, we'll see. I just keep playing this and see what he's gonna say. I'm just kind of curious. I suppose I should change the category to just chatting, though, before we proceed. Let me do this on the other screen, I guess.
Things which make you who you are, achievements or experience, they all fall through the cracks in our mind.
We do not become less of a person if we suffer from these conditions, but we can feel parts of us we had before slipping away.
Humans have been living longer and longer, but we can't always take our minds with us into those latter years. Sunita's rage and anger at herself at the pain of forgetting is palpable. The unfairness of
So this is interesting because that is sort of a real concern. So he was most recently talking about people potentially like forgetting that they had some sort of trophy for like some scientific achievement or something like that. Like imagine like living for hundreds or even thousands of years, you would have like maybe seen something like that and you wouldn't necessarily remember that potentially. Like it's true that we can forget a lot of stuff in our lives, no doubt about it, but that boils down to our entire body just like not, doing its job in general. You know what I mean? Like, if it weren't for the fact that we're all sinners and we're falling short, the glory of God or whatever you want to call it. I mean, if we were perfect, then obviously our brains would be fine. We'd be able to remember plenty of stuff, whatever we wish to. So, yeah, I really think this is kind of interesting because I feel like a lot of this is just people complaining about how imperfect our lives are. But sometimes people try to twist that into saying, well, I wouldn't want to live forever. Like, imagine all the consequences that would come with that. But I feel like they're not completely understanding what it would mean to live forever. Because if you're living forever, that means like your whole body can keep up with you, right? And like including your brain, like. So it just doesn't make sense to me that your brain would be malfunctioning and be unable to remember some achievements that you've, reached in the past and so on. So I think there's definitely some lack of clarity about expectations. But I mean, in any case, this is people supposing, just man-made immortality, like, which is obviously not a possibility. But I don't know, maybe some people are potentially tricked into thinking that it could be a possibility in the future. But anyway, yeah, no, that's just completely unrealistic. If anything, we're getting dumber as time goes on. Sure, the collective knowledge of the human race increases, but how we're able to use that knowledge is continuously limited. So we're kind of being held back by our own sin, essentially. Unavoidably so. And it's just going to be a matter of like, I feel like we've made a lot of the advancement that we're going to be making. there isn't much more to come, personally, in my opinion. But it's really hard to say for sure. Anyway.
The rules changing around her. You recognize the condition soon enough, but Sunita doesn't recognize it in herself, perhaps doesn't even want to. Throughout the game, you also hear piano music. Your partner, Dylan, is said to be a classical pianist, but...
Yeah, I really don't like piano, to be perfectly honest. It's overrated.
As the game goes on, the music starts to decay. It fills with static, the notes are a little off. It's hard not to see this as a reference to Leyland Kirby's Everywhere at the End of Time, a 6.5-hour composition and one of the most interesting and uncomfortable pieces of art I have ever encountered. The music is deceptive. It starts out coherent, composed, before a decay starts to creep in. The odd note might be off, the distortion is so brief and subtle you can convince yourself it didn't happen. But then musical cues repeat and the static creeps in till it's so loud that you realize it's there, and suddenly you can feel where everything's going wrong. Progressively, the music decays, slowly at first and then very quickly, losing definition and composition, drones pitching in until there is no definition. It is an empty, echoing shell, and all that's left are the hell sounds. No musical note can take shape in here, no melody or identity. There are brief moments of lucidity cutting through vague...
Yeah, I'm not familiar with what he was referencing.
6 hours ago, as memories often linger in the minds of those afflicted with degenerative conditions. The newest memories, like Sunita's awards, often go first. The final section of Leyland's piece is called "The Long Decline is Over," another word for decay.
It is difficult, to say the least, to find stories like this which are not, in one way or another, about maintaining some lost, desired youth. In the earliest mythic stories of the Fountain of Youth, the quest is more about finding waters which might turn an old man young than the idea of living forever. The Philosopher's Stone confers not only life on the even in Sekiro, in your final battle with Geneshiro, while the country is burning down around you, Geneshiro summons the leader of Ashina not just in his prime, but his youth, symbolically trying to revive the past and stall the inevitable decay at the cost of his own life and body. Youth becomes the way to victory, to vitality, to something worth preserving. These stories don't just channel our fears of a nebulous eternity, but of the loss of our bodily and psychological integrity. Immortality isn't just about preserving, it's about preserving a very specific version of us. The version we see as our best, as the most real, authentic, capable, upon which our vision of ourselves depends. When these stories talk about immortality depriving us of our ability to find meaning, it's hard to see how that isn't caught up in our ideas of youth and being able-bodied.
Yeah, I feel like these people... I feel like they might be over-glamorizing things that they appreciate about themselves. Like, if you think about it, as you grow older, in a way, you do become a worse person. In a lot of ways, that's true. But if you cannot manage to, at the same time, in some ways, even if somewhat limited, if you're unable to become a better person, in some ways, right? Like, I feel like that might be a lack of acknowledgement of your own accomplishments and current capability, or maybe you're just not trying. I definitely feel like I have achieved both. That is to say, I have become a worse person over time, and I've become a better person over time. It really just depends on what you're looking at. And you can identify ways in which I've improved as a person, ways in which I've gotten worse. You know, time and age and all that catches up with us. Like, our bodies are breaking down. Like, we begin to die as soon as we're born. And so you can try to point at a time in your life where you think this is the best version of yourself, but are you really being truthful. Yeah, maybe that's what you think, but does everybody agree with that? Like, probably not. Like, whatever the case, I do feel like we are unable to achieve our full potential, which some people apparently think they are, and then they think that that's stripped away from them because they're getting older and their bodies are starting to break down and blah blah blah. You know, sin continuing to fight them and bring them down. And that's the thing. So like if you do believe in the Bible and you believe in the saving power of Jesus Christ and all that stuff, right? Like him giving up his life for us so that we may live forever. Would you not believe that you would be able to remember so well as he can? Like he was able to quote from the scriptures very well and such. And anyways, like obviously he spent some time meditating when he was first baptized there, if I remember correctly, and that's when he got tempted by Satan the devil, or at least one of his representatives. But in any case, so what I find interesting is I feel like it's so often that we may find too much difficulty in forgiving ourselves and other people for our sin, you know? Like, we should be willing to forgive. We need to try our best to not sin, but at the same time, we need to acknowledge that we're going to sin whether we want to or not. It's just a part of us right now. Until that is dealt with fully, there's the best we can do is very limited, and we need to recognize that. And so I feel like it would be very silly to think that you personally could identify when you were at your best in your life, when realistically, if you are to obtain perfection in the future, why would you not think that that would be the best version of yourself or at some like time in the future, right? With a perfect body, living forever, wouldn't you suppose that every new day that went by you would be a newer, better version of yourself, and far better than any time before you became perfect? In any case, like, I just find that so interesting. Like, that's something for us to look forward to, and I feel like, if anything, at least to me, it makes me feel like it becomes easier to forgive myself and others for our mistakes, knowing that we will be so much better versions of ourselves in the future, if that's what we want. Anyway, and that's definitely one of the appealing things about being able to live forever, is being able to see everybody just improving as people around you. Just imagine like being surrounded by a bunch of wonderful people and you being, more wonderful than you can even imagine right now. What would that feel like? It's just it's kind of unimaginable, basically.
Something that bodily or neurological conditions often coming in old age interfere with. This isn't even true necessarily, but it is a fear a lot of.
So I can understand why people have a difficult time thinking about that, because it is unimaginable.
Often derive a lot of meaning. The horror that one
All we've known is sin, so it seems like it's all we could think about sometimes.
things for ourselves, that our own bodies will become prisons, our own minds sinking sand. When we're drawn to nostalgia, it's not just to the past, but to a day we felt we were more beautiful, our minds were sharper, our knees didn't hurt, when we were at the center of society. After all, retirement is often coupled with the loss of a job or children moving out. When so much of the world exists in the online, ever-evolving technological arena, our bodies and minds getting slower and losing the ability to keep up with the ever-evolving technologies of the world means being disconnected from much of the present society. The feeling of being a burden, of loneliness, is a legitimate, widespread issue. Our meaning and identity are caught up even more so in youth, more than they are in death. When we imagine ourselves as largely as needing to write that book, make that movie, climb that mountain, get that job before a certain age, an era of our lives, not before we die, and especially before we lose the bodily or mental ability to do these things at all. As Sunita loses her greatest achievements in the labyrinth of her mind, afflicted by her condition, as her body fails her, as she reaches everywhere at the end of time and the end of the Age of Fire.
Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray isn't just about a man selling his soul to live forever, but one desperately trying to preserve himself against the inevitable march of it.
How sad it is. I shall grow old and horrible and dreadful, jealous of everything whose beauty does not die, jealous of the portrait you have painted of me. Why should it keep what I must lose? Every moment that passes takes something from me and gives something to it.
What?
The anti-aging movement has taken off in the
That's so ridiculous.
where identity and value have become so wrapped up in one's appearance. Almost all of the stories we've talked about in this video speak to immortals finding purpose primarily in pursuits easiest when you have an able body and mind, raising children, games of physical prowess, competition, art, with perfectly controlled finesse, memory, and building. And more importantly, these stories are about the horror of losing those things.
The horror here is not living without these things, but losing them after finding so much of ourselves in them and knowing they are slipping away from us, from our bodies and minds for years, and not being able to stop it. For most of my life, my grandfather was one of the most physically active, hands-on, do-it-yourself, present in the world, see everything, do everything people you could imagine. He was out sailing and fishing and building and landscaping, and he had this gorgeous house up on this hill. Right into his old age, he was funny, smart, really with it, intellectual sparring partner, until one day, several years ago now, he was diagnosed with progressive supranuclear palsy, or PSP, an extremely rare and aggressive neurological disorder caused by a buildup of these unusual proteins in the brain. It started out in small things. He lost his balance while walking. He got tremors in his hands, or his muscles stiffened up so he couldn't pick up a knife or fork. But I think the thing I remember the most was his anger. I watched him lose his ability to walk, but before that, his ability to work with his hands at all. And he hated that. God, he hated it. It made him so angry that this was his fate. He couldn't garden or fillet a fish or help with his hands in the way he used to, and he could feel the whole time that slipping away from him. Eventually, he lost his ability to speak, and he couldn't look you in the eye. He felt his body and mind were turning against him, and so suddenly, all of this happened in just a couple of years. And he was angry. I remember that so vividly. Angry that so much of what had given him meaning in life was just being ripped from him, day by day, week by week. Death was an afterthought compared to the decay. Eventually, my grandparents had to move out of their home up on that hill, a home I knew he loved. It was full of all this sailing memorabilia. He was a sailor, and the stairs and the heights were too dangerous for him. His own body could literally not exist in the place he called home, even if his mind wanted to. He never made it to their new home. He was too ill. He lived with us in those final days. He lay on this bed, mouth agape, death just one gasp away. And as bad as it sounds, I really struggled to see him like that. I struggled to go to him and talk to him as he faced all of this, knowing how much he hated the fate life had left him to, that he didn't feel like it was him lying on that bed anymore. And I really didn't know how to face up to that. When I finally went to him, I remember thanking him, not only for being the best grandfather I could ever ask for, but because there's a decent chance that I wouldn't be doing this at all if it wasn't for him. He was the one who gave me my first tripod. One day he came to me and he said, "Hey, use this, and then when you're done with it, sell it on Trade Me. That's New Zealand eBay. And I did. I took it. And what did I do? I went out and I bought a $150 camera, and I started making videos. And I never looked back. But I also know why I struggled so much in his final days. The truth is, I am terrified of death. The idea that I could just cease to exist one day and there is nothing I can do about that terrifies the hell out of me. I am 28 now, so statistically I'm about a third of my way through my life. But I also know that when you ask people what the middle of their life is, they tend to say somewhere around the age of 30. So in that way, I'm already halfway dead. But even more so, I'm afraid of the decay that might come with that. I'm terrified of losing myself before death. I'm painfully aware I have a countdown with these hands with which to write the stories I want to write, or these legs with which to hike the mountains I want to hike. Limited time before my brain slows down and the world keeps moving faster. When I think about immortality, I'm thinking about preserving some semblance of who I am in body and mind. I regret not spending more time with my granddad. I am ashamed that I struggled to go to him when he was suffering because I was uncomfortable with watching someone suffer a fate that I might one day too. It's a human response, but still. I know that if I was given a chance at eternal youth, I would take it. And I'd love to say it's because all the skeptics are wrong and actually immortality will be completely fine. But if I'm honest, it's because my fear of losing myself is probably stronger than my will to examine all of that particularly rationally. So much of my identity is wrapped up in my life as a creative, as a writer, and those are inherently caught up in the parts of my body. They're physical, tangible things I need to protect. My hands.
I'm not sure what he's trying to say right now.
Preserve as long as possible. No wonder my granddad was so angry when he lost the use of his hands. Or think about their minds as a scientist, like Sunita does. The finesse of their finger as an engineer or artist. Those who suffer through conditions like this can become new versions of themselves, just as worthy of protection and respect. But it's hard not to see the sadness in what was lost in that transition. Unlike Zima Blue, we do not get to decide who and what we become. That choice is taken from us. I don't know what lurks in my genes, and I don't know that I would want to know. My fate might already be written there. But I don't think that makes it designed, I don't think that makes it fair or deserved, that I should just surrender to it. Death is already written into all of our genes. At some point, even we in our cells decay and our ability to renew ourselves runs out. But that doesn't make it right or deserve it, does it? We lament death, but we lament the persistent temporariness of youth even more in that. The further we grow from it, the greater reminder of its value we get. And in that, immortality becomes more about reaching into the past than it does into the future. Of course, even faced with the inevitable decay of everything we know, we do try to immortalize some modicum of the meaning we have found through legacy.
Well, I mean, talking about deserving is really complicated kind of talk. Essentially what it boils down to is there's a couple of things. One is we are sinful by our very nature. So in a way, we are deserving of death itself. However, that does not mean that we're deserving of an additional death. All right. So basically what's going on here is Jehovah, or God, he's looking at mankind in general and looking at how, you know, they're doomed, right? They're all gonna die. And that's why even in the book of Genesis, he already made a promise that he was going to fix things for us. And that's why he sent his son, you know, Jesus Christ, the Messiah, to cover for our sins. So the idea is that he is giving us an undeserved kindness. But then, so at that point, when we are able to take advantage of this kindness, and then we manage to have perfect bodies, then at that point, it's up to us to make the choices to live our lives in a way so that we wouldn't deserve death again, right? And so that's something to look forward to. Like right now, there's kind of nothing really we can do about it, but we can, at the very least, show appreciation for what Jesus and Jehovah have done for us, and tell other people about this. And I feel like it's important for you to get as many of the facts straight as possible when you're trying to explain these things to people. And that's not always easy to do. But if you struggle with it, feel free to let people know that you're struggling with it, and maybe they can help you understand things a little bit better. But in any case, yeah, coming together, I think, and doing what we can to appreciate on an individual basis and as groups, I think will be good.
Pass on the seeds we plant for later generations, the art we leave behind. It's weird to think that these 400 or so videos so far of me in my 20s are gonna probably outlast me in some shape or form deep in the bowels of the internet. But they are not in totality. And eventually they will vanish too. My name will disappear. Right now, I am standing in the ruins of a village in rural France from the 1790s. Right here, there was a mill where people used to feed their grain.
I want to talk about that for a minute. So he talks about the his name disappearing over time. And yeah, it's kind of true. Like, when you're not living forever, you're gonna die, then maybe some stuff that you've published will keep living on for a while, but even that may vanish into obscurity. Maybe the YouTube algorithm will bury it, or maybe YouTube will stop existing altogether, and that kind of thing. But then you also have to consider, because one of the things that's being talked to us about in the Bible is, hope of a resurrection. And the hope of the resurrection says that there will be a resurrection of the righteous and the unrighteous. So essentially what's happening here is anybody that has already been resurrected, who then remembers you and is wondering what would you be like if you were to be resurrected, that's going to result in like a sort of a chain reaction of resurrection. At least that's what I would suppose was what would happen. So, and then anybody that you remember, well, they're going to get resurrected, right? So eventually somebody remembers you, you get resurrected, and then you remember your grandfather, and then he gets resurrected, and then you remember somebody else, and then they get resurrected. It's like a chain, and then you all get to meet with one another, and you get to communicate, and you get to ponder over, your newfound blessing of, being potentially free of sin and all that, and what you'll do with your life and so on, and what you can do with your new bodies that are able to, not be bound to sin and so on. So we're not subject to the second death any longer unless we choose to be. So, alright. We're not bound to death any longer. So, think about that. That's such a powerful thing to hope in. We know that we're doomed right now, but there's still hope after we die, essentially, is what I'm trying to say here. So, and there is a possibility that some people may never taste death at all, but those people would probably not be very many in the grand scheme of things, I would imagine. There's been so many people that have already lived and died over the many, many years of mankind. So I would assume that they would be outnumbered greatly, but to what ratio? Don't ask me, I wouldn't know.
Into flour. Over there is the well where they used to draw up water. It's since been filled in, covered with ivy and barred up so that no one falls in. Other ruins are scattered around the fields, just home to owls and rats now. You might have heard them in this video, funnily enough. But they are all that is left of the people who lived here, just a shadow of their handiwork. I don't know why they cried or laughed or found achievements. I don't know what meaning they found in this world. Don't they deserve to see what they might have become, what new meaning they might have found? I think my granddad did. I think the 1.3 million people who died from tuberculosis last year did, or the 700,000 people from malaria did. Everyone knows the first line of Dylan Thomas's famous poem, "Do not go gently into that good night," but fewer remember the second and rest. Old age should burn and rave at the close of day. Rage, rage, against dying life. It's both a vindication of this quest and a demand that it be worth it. We are suffering and rest, and what louder will it be to death written into our hearts? I do not want to say a longer life will not be fraught with its own problems, that there will not be decays we must resist and fight off, knowing that the age of fire
I'm not sure exactly what he's saying here. Sounds like he's just trying to be like a humanitarian or whatever without the spiritual slant. I guess he's getting to his conclusion finally. It doesn't show the entire YouTube video timeline here, but because I put it on full screen, right? We could drag this over here, and now you can see, yeah, we're very close to the end, right? Anyway.
I mean to say a longer life will not be fraught with its own problems, that there will not be decays we must resist and fight off. Knowing when the age of fire needs to end matters. But shouldn't we get to make that choice?
I think that's interesting because I think what could end up happening in the future is I think some people will be making that choice earlier than others. They'll I mean, like, think about it. Like, they'll make the choice to die again. They'll make the choice to sin again, and they could potentially corrupt or contaminate other people's, desires, potentially. And so that's might be what would be the next obstacle after being resurrected, I suppose. Like, I imagine what that would be like. Like, I mean, what would it even mean to sin, after being resurrected? Like, I'm very curious. I feel like nowadays people probably do not really have an accurate idea of what sinning entails. Like, I think there's a lot of things that we do nowadays that do not qualify as sinning that people might just assume qualify as sinning, you know what I mean? And that's just so very interesting. And if nothing else, like, maybe some of those, maybe all of those things do qualify as sinning, but perhaps in the future, when everybody else are sharing the same physical conditions, perhaps those things will no longer be sins, you know what I mean? Like, what if, for example, just, I don't know, like, you just punch somebody? Maybe that's a sin right now, right? Because that's gonna hurt them, right? And maybe in the future, you could punch someone and it doesn't hurt them. So then does that mean it's not a sin? Maybe, I don't know. It's hard to say. Like, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I suppose that it might become more difficult to sin, after we've died and been resurrected. Like, just in general, not just because of, us no longer being, at the mercy of sin, but also just the nature of humanity in general will be so much more resilient, I guess, if that makes sense. It's gonna be harder for us to, like, harm one another, right? There are a variety of methods that continue to happen right now. Anyway, Just thought I'd throw that out there.
Rage to keep up that revolt as much as we can, to not let the sun set until we are finished up. When we have, as Thomas writes, done every good, made every difference. I only rage because I am unfinished with this world, as too many die already unfinished with theirs. The poem ends with a man begging his dying father to fight on. I couldn't help but see my own grandfather's righteous anger in those words. And you, my father, there on a sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage, against the dying of the light. Video, funnily enough, but they are not me, not in totality, and eventually they will vanish too. My name will.
So I guess what he's trying to say is he understands why people are horrified about living forever, because you lose a part of yourself as you inevitably die, right? Because like he noticed that happen with his grandfather. But you know, it's interesting because not everybody goes through that level of debilitation. In a way, you know, even though your father was angry about what happened to him, like I feel like if anything, you know, he should be intrigued, I guess you could say, that he got to experience that. Like in the future, like other people that may have died much younger than he did, right? That didn't take as good of care of themselves. Maybe they wouldn't have experienced the same sorts of problems that he experienced, right? And they wouldn't have known what that would have been like, and he could have actually talk about that, you know what I mean? Like, it's interesting how we can go through a lot of problems in our lives, and it can be difficult for us to talk about it. But imagine in the future when everybody's going to have a bunch of like wild stories of what sin has done to them that they can share, and like it's going to be very interesting because there'll be no incentive for us to lie. Obviously, as soon as we start lying, then we're sinning again, and then we're going to die, right? So I would suppose a lot of the time we'd be able to believe you know, when people are speaking the truth. That's going to be really interesting. Like, it's going to be easier for identify when people are lying. Like, I don't even know. Probably. Anyway, there's a lot to think about, but anyway, that's enough.